Like you, I see a lot of COVID-19 communications and advice for healthcare marketers on how we're supposed to handle this pandemic. Today, I want to talk about something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, probably because they're too busy to be thinking about this. And it's the fact that we need a plan going forward for how we're going to transition and make that pivot from talking about COVID-19 to hopefully one day talking about our services that we offer our patients. The reality is, and you know this, our hospitals are not just facing a public health crisis. They're facing a financial crisis. It's estimated that our hospitals will lose at least 25% of their annual revenue this year because of our response to COVID-19 and the drain it's put upon these organizations. That makes it all the more important that once this crisis is over, we can hit the ground running with marketing that drives revenue for our organizations. To do that, hospitals will need a post-pandemic marketing plan now that will allow them to do just that, to hit the ground running and avoid that long ramp-up period that we often have when we're starting out a new fiscal year. I know just thinking about having to put together a post-pandemic marketing plan is probably unfathomable right now. You're in the middle of dealing with COVID-19. I get that. But the reality is it has to be done. For our hospitals to survive, we're gonna have to have a process and a map laid out for how we exit out of this COVID-19 communications and smoothly transition into service line marketing that's gonna drive patient volume and that's not going to be crass, because it does run the risk of being crass. If one day we're talking about COVID-19 and the next day we're talking about bariatric surgery or joint replacements. An obvious place to start with the strategic planning is to go back to the plan that you had prepared for this year and ask yourself, what services did we already have planned to market? Now, those might not be the right services in the post-pandemic era. Keeping in mind that we need to drive margin for our organizations to help them through this financial crisis, we need to look at the existing service lines that we had planned to market and say, are these the right services? Are these the services that are going to drive a significant contribution margin for the organization? There are lots of different reasons we select various service lines to be part of the marketing plan. And it's not always because a given service line contributes the most to the bottom line of the organization. It's not always a financial decision. Frankly, some are not financially viable and yet we still market them. And sometimes that's because there is a service line leader, usually a physician, who is advocating for that department, saying, we want to be promoted. This is not the time to give in to that. Trust me, this is a time to promote the service lines that are going to drive volume and that are going to drive revenue and contribution margin to your organization. This is not the time to stroke egos or to appease individuals within the organization. We have to be realistic. This is about the survival of our hospitals. Once you've identified the services that are appropriate to get us out of this financial crisis, then I recommend starting the creative development process now. Don't wait till we're at the bottom of that curve that everyone's talking about. Start the creative development and content development process now so you have content ready to go when it's appropriate. When you're creating the marketing plan for exiting COVID-19 and moving into service line communications, you want to think about how to do that transition gracefully. And you want to develop communications and messaging that helps the consumer and your employees, for that matter, make that transition with you. So right now, while we're kind of in that maintenance phase of COVID-19 communication, you want to be putting out messages that tell people, hey, or remind people that we do more than just deal with a crisis. You know, this is a unique time. We've got the attention of the communities we serve. but they're thinking very much in terms of crisis and in terms of pandemic. And what we need to do is remind them that we're their healthcare organizations day in and day out, not just in a crisis. I loved the other day, I was on Facebook and I saw Copley Hospital in Morrisville, Vermont was running something on their Facebook news stream. And it was a post, and the headline of the post was just, "We continue to serve." And I love that, just the word continue. First of all, there was a feeling of normalcy, which we all crave normalcy right now during this crisis. But the message was powerful, and in a very few amount of words, they're saying, we're here for you when you're having babies. We're here for you when you have a broken arm. And we're here for you when you're dealing with COVID-19. So that kind of messaging that we are your healthcare provider day in and day out, year in and year out, in good times and bad, that kind of messaging today can help prepare the consumer for us leaving this COVID-19 crisis communication era that we're in and transition into more of a traditional service line marketing era. Another thing you can be doing that's proactive is communicate right now with those people who had their procedures and surgeries delayed because of the coronavirus. Economically, it's really important because you'll have them on the books, they're lined up, they're ready to come in and have their procedure after this crisis has subsided. That's huge. But there's also a marketing perspective to this, that you're top of mind, you're having them think about the hospital as more than just the place that's dealing with the coronavirus. You're reminding them that you're the place that takes care of them, whatever their needs might be. One of the things we've been talking a lot about as we think about the day that's going to come when we aren't dealing with the coronavirus anymore is, what will the creative be like? What will content marketing be like after the virus? And I have to believe it will change. I think it should change. During this era, during this episode, we've had a lot of clinicians out in front of the public, assuring them that things are being done appropriately, that we're doing everything we can to protect the public and to protect our patients. So a lot of equity has been developed, and there's a lot of trust in these local clinicians that have been very high profile throughout this crisis. And normally, I'm not a huge fan of marketing that features doctors or nurses. I think marketing should be about the patient in the end. But I'll tell you, after coming out of this crisis, where we've had all this equity built up for these healthcare workers, communities have rallied around our hospitals. They've rallied around these healthcare providers. They're sitting at home. They're sewing masks and donating them to the hospital. They're coming in and bringing food for the emergency department. Small businesses are making donations of PPEs. It's a new day, and I don't want to let that go. So I do think, as my firm thinks about producing creative and content for the post-pandemic era, I do think that clinicians are going to play a much bigger role within that marketing. It just makes sense to do it. The other thing I would say is, we've been given a huge gift within this pandemic. And I know it sounds odd to say it, but it's true. That gift is the connection we now have with these communities. Day in and day out, we are taken for granted at hospitals and health systems. We're kind of there and we're expected to be there, but we truly are taken for granted. People don't want to think about their local hospital. They don't want to think about healthcare. And they certainly don't want to think about procedures and surgeries and so on. But the gift we've been given in this crisis is suddenly people do care. They're connected with us in a way they haven't been connected in years and years. So as we move forward beyond the pandemic, we need to make sure we don't lose that. We need to embrace that and carry it forward with us into the new post-pandemic era, because that's golden. That relationship with the community is better than any marketing we can buy. And frankly, the marketing we do in that post-pandemic era should leverage that connection with the community. It's so rich and it's so full of potential. The bottom line here is that we are in the middle of a crisis, and it's tough, and none of us have a lot of time for strategic planning. But the truth is we're going to come out of this crisis. And when we do, we're going to want to be able to hit the ground running with marketing that's going to help our organizations, help their financial position. They need it like they've never needed it before. So having a post-pandemic marketing plan in place and strategy in place is exactly what we need right now to come out of this successfully.